So tonight, this is an event that we jurors look forward to. It's the culmination of many months of reading, discussing, and discerning among a rich selection of strong works. All the jurors are literary professionals of one stripe or another. We have professors, poets, novelists, and editors among us, and librarians. Very important. We are an extremely appreciative audience for the books we consider. Most of us have written books ourselves, and I'd like to ask the jury to stand who are here. We have Roz Chang, Grace Roos, who are young adult and juvenile. We have Peter Fish and Sarah Manyika here, who are fiction. We have Stephen Boyd Sam and myself, who will read for nonfiction. And poetry tonight is represented by Dean Rader and Sarah Rosenthal. And a highlight of being on this jury, you guys can sit down now, is the company of these folks who are, to one, thoughtful and deep, and I'll even say downright brilliant readers. We just really have a great time doing this award. It's worth emphasizing that although we do name winners, all the finalists we consider are exceptional books. This year we had a suite of novels that wrestle with familial bonds against time, space, and race. We had an especially strong year for nonfiction, but we had quite a number of books coming in over the 500 or so page mark, so we are actually physically stronger from hauling those around for months. Poetry presented a fascinating diversity of sensibilities this year, as it always does, and was, as it always is, a great relief to read after some of these lengthier narratives. Young adult literature always presses at the boundaries of the finest fiction in any category, and our winner this year especially deserves mention as rewarding for any age reader. And what a fun task it is to help choose the winner in children's literature, a category in which rhythm and patterning and pictures are all part of a multisensory experience. We are all still the right age for picture books. So every year on the jury, and I've been on it for 8 years, I ask myself, what does California literature mean? California is not just a state of mind. We have a dramatic geology driven by our famous fault lines. We have a dynamic marine environment created by cyclical currents that support one of the richest ocean food webs in the world. We have a special suite of plant life, and in fact, we rank as the California floristic province. We have more recognized Native American tribes than any other state. And that floristic province, together with the marine life and the geology and our history, all create special pockets of what scientists like to call heterogeneity, which means lots of difference. And this applies to our various multiform cultural lives as well as to our physical places. And perhaps it is the environment here, then, that fosters such an incredible diversity and originality in our writers. So I will soon pass over the torch, but I'd like to thank a small army of sharp literature-loving college student interns this year who helped Mellon O'Keefe, the Book Awards producer, celebrate California writers by coordinating these awards. But Mellon deserves a huge round of applause for being a fantastic mother hen and CEO and COO. And also Tara Crane from the club went above and beyond this year, and we are grateful to her. We're also super thankful to our sponsor, the Bank of the West. So to begin tonight's festivities, please welcome Paul Weibel, Senior Executive Vice President and National Finance Group Head from Bank of the West.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Good evening, everyone. Absolutely delighted to be with you tonight. It's an honor for Bank of the West to be sponsoring this event, one of my personal favorite events of the year. We're also very involved with the Commonwealth Club of California. We have fellow executives serving as board members, and I believe this is our 5th or 6th year of sponsoring the California Book Awards. My favorite part about tonight, and as I said, my 5th year, is to hear the story behind the story from the authors themselves, to hear what prompted them to write the book, to hear about their inspiration and how hard they worked. And it serves as a real example for all of us that if you have a life's passion, you should pursue it and do the very, very best that you can, and you'll get recognized, hopefully get recognized for that. Bank of the West supports education and reading in lots of different ways. Such as events like this, and also a sponsorship with a very important group that I'm very proud to be a part of, and so is the bank, called Raising a Reader. It helps families discover a love of reading and developing skills for success in schools. The National Executive Director of Raising a Reader, Gabrielle Miller, is joining us tonight. Gabrielle, I saw you sitting next to me. Please stand and say hello. So, on behalf of Bank of the West, its 10,000 employees, and certainly myself, it's my pleasure to offer our sincere congratulations to all the authors being honored tonight. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
Okay, sorry, guys. I think Roz, you're up. Yeah, Roz.
Good evening. I'm Rosalind Chang, and I will be presenting the awards for juvenile and young adult literature. The lists of finalists in all categories can be found in your program. The challenge of selecting a winner in the juvenile category lies in the wide range of eligible books. The diverse ages covered by this category are those from birth to and including age 10, so it's a pretty wide range. Fellow jurist Grace Ruth read all the entries and selected 5 finalists. They included a nonfiction title in picture book format, 3 picture-based books, and a text-based fictional story for upper ages. Our winner is Marissa Moss for Barbed Wire Baseball, with illustrations by Yuko Shimizu and published by Abrams Books for Young Readers. Marissa tells the true story of Kenichi Zenemura, whose dream of playing baseball isn't hampered by his small size or later by his detention in a World War II internment camp. The author shows readers that dreams don't die and that the human spirit can rise above adversity. Congratulations, Marissa Moss, the gold medal winner in juvenile literature for Barbed Wire Baseball.
Well, first I want to thank my publisher Abrams for supporting this book and for choosing an illustrator who's done such a magnificent job. If you haven't seen the book, just look at the art. Yuko Shimizu is Japanese from Japan, so she didn't know this story, which I'm surprised to hear about 72% of people in this country don't. But if you're from California, as I am, you probably do. And many of us heard it from a neighbor, a friend, and in my case, a teacher who had been interned. And I remember being horrified to think that our own government could trample on people's rights that way, imprisoning everybody of Japanese American descent all along the coast, just because of their ethnicity. When I did research for this book, I found photographs of the playing field that Kenichi Zenemura built. And this was in the desert in Gila River, and it was not a makeshift effort. It was really a field of dreams. He made sure it was perfect, just gorgeous. And when he started playing, it was an outlet for all the camps. It was the only time the prisoners could leave. They played local teams as well as each other, and he gave pride and purpose to his fellow internees. More than that, he gave them back their identity as Americans, because really, who else plays baseball? Zenny has died, as is one of his sons, but the other one, Howard, who was a teenager in the camp, is still alive. He and his brother became professional baseball players in Japan, and I sent him a copy of the book, which was the most terrifying moment of the whole process. Because usually I write about people who are not alive. I mean, Kenichi Zenemura isn't, but his son was, and he's in the book. And I was dreading that I hadn't written up to the story that he wanted. Not only did he love it, he recently went back to Gila River with his son and his granddaughter for closure, and he brought the book, which to me was the biggest honor I could get until tonight. This honor is another one, and I'm deeply honored that this book receives the California Book Award, not just for myself, but as a recognition for Kenichi Zenemura, a man who deserves to be better known and a history that everybody needs to know. Thank you.
The 5 finalists in the young adult category vary in content and style. but all have strong voices and tell their stories very well. This year's gold medalist is Tom McNeill for Far, Far Away, published by Alfred A. Knopf. Listen, if you will. Once upon a time, an author wrote a story about a small town where there was a ghost, a boy, a girl, a baker, and the mysterious disappearance of town's children. This tale spun a web of enchantment upon the California Book Award jurists, and they declared it to be the fairest of them all. Congratulations to Tom McNeill, the gold medal winner in young adult literature for Far, Far Away.
I could not be happier to be here. I do want to thank a few people. First of all, you jurors who go through all of this, and especially Roz and Grace who did our category. It's a thankless job. The least I can do is give you a public thank you. Also want to thank the Commonwealth Club and Dr. Martha Cox, the Bill Lane, the estate, I guess, of Bill Lane, for coming up with a little bit of monetary compensation, which was a complete surprise and really good to hear about. I also, the last time that I was here, I came because my wife, Laura, who's sitting over here, and I had written a book that you guys chose to honor. But I did not get to sit in on the entire ceremony. About a month before that occasion, by necessity, we had to take our baby and 2-year-old to a funeral. And they were so good. They slept and smiled through the whole thing. And so we thought we could bring them to this. You'll be happy to know that the award ceremony at the Commonwealth Club is more stimulating than a funeral. And one of them started to cry, the other started to cry. Laura was going to do the talking that night, so I took the 2-year-old, and the course of this ceremony I spent out on Market Street. Peter Fish, who is sitting here, I don't think he remembers this, but he said it's coming back to him. He took the baby and went off to the men's room or something to try to keep him quiet. Laura swears that when I didn't get to hear her talk. She swears that while she was talking, she could hear the baby crying far away. Anyway, that was 14 years ago. After that, Laura and I wrote several books together. I've written books. And with this book, Far, Far Away, I began to see that this could be the last time that I would be able to write something kind of customized for our 2 sons who had grown up. And I thought, once we kind of had this idea of a narrator as a ghost, because Laura was in on the planning of all of this, I went to our older boy, Sam, and I said, so Sam, I'm thinking about writing a book that's narrated by a 200-year-old ghost who befriends and is meant to protect a 14-year-old boy. And what do you think about that? He thought for a minute, and he said, what would be really cool is if the ghost went with him to school and helped him with the tests. And then, because this is kind of the way he works, and then he said, but that wouldn't be right. And then he said, but it would be really cool. And if you do get to read the book or have read the book, you'll see that ethical ambivalence worked its way in. So now those two boys are 14 and 16. They play a lot of baseball. They play a lot of tennis. They're very keen on trophies and medals and awards. So I really want to thank you all because I get to go home and say, look, the old guy gets one every now and then too. So thank you.
My name is Dean Rader. I'm here to present the Silver Medal for Poetry. And I'm glad that you made the child-based entree because the book I'm going to award is The Boss by Victoria Chang. And pretty much every day, my 5-year-old son, Gavin, asks me who the boss is of something. Who's the boss of San Francisco? Who's the boss of USF? Who's the boss of the whole world? Who's the boss of our family? Not this guy. Who's the boss of Christmas? Lately, it's been who's the boss of the zoo, it's a great one. Our desire, early on and late as it happens, to know who the boss is of our various worlds is the animating force behind Victoria Chang's wholly enjoyable book of poems. In lyrics that toe the line between the politic and the comic, Chang, very much like my son, muses on bosses, bossness, the hierarchies of power, as well as the longing for and the loss of control. The difference is her musings are more elegant, not just because they contain fewer poop references, but because she understands the complexities and contradictions of power only someone who is both a parent and a child and a writer can. In poems about her ailing father, the poet's inability to control the situation is a source of frustration and confusion, not unlike the poet's daughter's frustration and confusion at her mom's insistence on bossiness. As a poet, I love this book because the poems are a beguiling marriage between the innovative and the traditional. On one hand, the poems jettison all punctuation and gather momentum by leaping from idea to concept to description to question. Things happen really quickly in these poems. There is no time for commas. On the other hand, each poem arrives in neat quatrains with cool little indentations of the second and fourth lines. In this sense, the poems are notoriously consistent, bordering on formal. The 4 lines of the quatrains, repeating constantly, evoke a series of cubicles where you just know something edgy and exciting has to be going on in there. As it happens, something edgy and exciting is going on inside these fantastic poems. So join me in congratulating Victoria Chang for her book of poetry, The Boss, published by McSweeney's.
Oh, there's a lot of people back there. Thank you so much. I usually ad-lib, but I watched some older YouTube videos to prepare, and I saw everybody had a piece of paper, so I have one too. But thank you so much to the Commonwealth Club and the jurors, and that was a wonderful introduction, Dean. I really appreciate it. Thank you to my McSweeney's editors, Dominic Luxford and Jesse Nathan, who I adore. I can't speak much more than that. They're like my poetry family in many ways. So I wrote these poems while I was sitting in a minivan in a parking lot in Irvine, California, while I was waiting for my daughter, 5 at the time, to finish a language class. And each week I would return and resume writing in front of the same tree. And it was, really hot summer, and I remember my legs sticking to the chair, and I sat for 2.5 hours each week for 2 months and had these things that ended up being these poems. And at the time, when I was writing these things, I I was experiencing just a maelstrom of events, and I had this really challenging boss. My father had had a stroke and was suffering from aphasia, and so he had a lot of language loss. And then I had these two children that I still have them, but at that time they were under the age of 5. So I felt like I was losing control of everything, and started writing these sort of long line things with no titles and no punctuation. And I also wanted the language to really propel the work forward. So there's a lot of wordplay in the book. I'm almost done, but I'm going to quote, it's probably tacky to quote a reviewer, but someone had written about this project that I felt they could describe it better than I ever could. Michael Wilson wrote, quote, "When the world breaks apart beneath you, there are only a few choices available: to pick it up and carry it with you, or to throw it away, abandoning the mess. That mess exists either way. The question is about who and when it gets dealt with," unquote. I believe poetry is not only the miracle that allows us to deal with life's messes, but also a way to reflect on what it means to be human, unlike any other art form. And in my wildest dreams, I would have never expected these poems, which described my own sort of suffocation and problems I was grappling with, to eventually reach the surface and to be published. And I certainly never imagined that I would ever be standing here accepting a California Book Award. So thank you again, McSweeney's, for bringing these poems to life, to this great city where I actually came of age, and to the California Commonwealth Club for shining a light on poetry in general and on this book in particular. Thank you.
Hi. Down here for the lowly of us. I'm Sarah Rosenthal, and it's my privilege to collaborate with my colleagues Dean Rader, who you just heard from, and Justin Chin, to select 5 finalists in the poetry category to be considered by the entire jury. So this year we have gold and silver medals in poetry, as you know, but all 5 finalists listed in your program are well worth your attention. This year's gold medal goes to Brenda Hillman's book, Seasonal Works with Letters on Fire, the last in her tetralogy about the elements of earth, air, water, and fire. In an era when the Buddhist notion of no self has permeated many corners of our culture, Hillman celebrates the multitude of selves existing within and around us, and hardly limited to the human. In this work, everything is cracklingly alive and in conversation with everything else. Verbs do flips like Russian gymnasts. Seeds are eco-terrorists refusing to sprint for Monsanto. Visitor greets anti-visitor. And someone prays for you, even if you don't like it. In poems packed with references to everything from Shakespeare to Twitter, from Diebenkorn to the Pentagon, and Cassandra to Helvetica, this volume renews the lyric, embracing experiment in a spirit of serious play. Serious, because the planetary disaster is upon us, brought about by our own hand, our own multiple hands. Play, because it's a daily miracle, a joy in fact. To be, to read or write a poem, to ponder the imponderables, to take a stand for what you believe, while miles up, sparks are dragged through meteors, and miles down, creatures eat rock mixed with fire. Brenda Hillman has published 9 books of poetry. She serves on the faculty of St. Mary's College in Moraga, and she works as a nonviolent activist for Code Pink. She's the recipient of numerous honors, including a Northern California Book Award and an Academy of American Poets Fellowship. Congratulations to Brenda Hillman, the gold medal winner in poetry for Seasonal Works with Letters on Fire, published by Wesleyan.
Thank you, Sarah, so much, and thank you all for attending. Thanks to the Commonwealth Club. And I want to just acknowledge what Sarah said is absolutely true, that the five nominees, we all share gratitude. I think the other four nominees and Victoria Chang are amazing works. This collection began 18 years ago when I had the notion. I had been working on alchemy, and I was thinking, well, it would be interesting to write a book on California geology. And I started working, and I thought, well, it would be really interesting to write a book on California elements, and then working, and soon one thing led to another. I'm aware of the gentleman's asking for the background of what writers are thinking when they start. So this book really came out of a very small thread of an impulse, thinking that there was something special about being in nature in California, in a very great nature tradition, really started by Kenneth Rexroth. And I really have assumed all the way along that as writers, we want to be very local and very specific about our environments, and also universal at the same time. So 18 years later, the Fire book is kind of the completion of this notion that the classical elements. Recently, a friend asked, well, what are you going to do now that the four elements are finished? And fortunately, I heard that in Korea there's a fifth element. So I'm working on wood, and so the little trail has started again. I want to deeply thank my family and friends who support the writing. I know we all of us who are writers have family and friends who support our writing. I have the best editor at Wesleyan, just the most wonderful editor. And I also want to acknowledge book designers don't often get credit, and we all are just fortunate to have great book designers. So I want to acknowledge how much we depend on those designers. And deepest from my deep heart, my beloved husband, Bob Hass, who's a great poet, universally great poet, and has supported my writing for almost 30 years. And so I just wanted to thank him from the bottom of my heart, and encourage you all to keep poetry in your lives. It's I think the best way language can get you to the weird in your soul, and to take you straight directly to your dream life. And it's a trick to make this sort of compressed nuggets of your soul, but poetry gets you there really, really fast, with great effort to finally craft the poem. So anyway, thank you for your attention and your support of the arts and of literature. Thanks.
Oh, I think I'm jumping the gun. I'm sorry, it's Stephen. I'll go ahead. Oh, sorry. Something was skipped. Sorry. Oh, periodic radio reminder. This is the Commonwealth Club of California program, and tonight we are celebrating the 83rd Annual California Book Awards with the winning authors. You can catch up with us on Facebook and Twitter, hear Commonwealth Club programs on the radio, or on our YouTube channel. So every year the Commonwealth Club recognizes a book that is sui generis, somewhat bursting the bounds of the standard category of nonfiction and reflecting particularly on a piece or pieces of this great state. The category is Californiana. The winner this year is Chief, The Quest for Justice in California, an oral history spanning the career of Chief Justice Ronald M. George, retired. This is one of the big books I referenced earlier, 800 pages. but the length is more than justified. Covering a career that in its early days included the cases of Saran Saran and Marvin Gaye. Chief Justice George, of course, goes down in history for legalizing same-sex marriage in California in 2008, finding that sexual orientation is a protected class like race and gender. It was published by the University of California, Berkeley Public Policy Press, Institute of Government Studies. Praise is also due Laura McCready, who interviewed and edited this voluminous oral history and whose intelligence and discernment are unobtrusive in the book, but not quite invisible. McCready knows what to ask and when to ask it and when to stand back and let the judge flow. This is truly a contribution to how we understand our state. Congratulations to Judge Ronald M. George, the gold medal winner in Californiana for Chief, the quest for justice in California. The intrepid Judge George is on an expedition to the Arctic. Of course he is. So we are thrilled to have Linda McCreary to accept the award on his behalf and the team at the University of California at Berkeley Public Policy Press. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Chief Justice George asked me to express his great appreciation to the Commonwealth Club and his regrets to all of you for not being in this room. As you have just heard, he is preferring the company of polar bears at the moment. The book Chief is an oral history on which he and I collaborated shortly after he retired in 2011. And so rather than a traditional narrative, it is in fact an edited question and answer format. I interviewed him many times and for many hours over the course of 6 months, and we talked about his full career. So to give you an idea, he was hired out of Stanford Law School by then State Attorney General Stanley Mosk in 1964, and then went on to 38 years on the bench as both a municipal and superior court judge in Los Angeles, a justice of the California Court of Appeal and of the Supreme Court, the last 15 years as Chief Justice. In that role, he pursued some very major reforms of the statewide court system while also carrying his share of cases on the Supreme Court itself. The decisions of the George Court did not seem to attract the kinds of ideological labels or predictable voting patterns that some of us may possibly associate with today's US Supreme Court. But Chief Justice George fairly often did hold the center of our 7-member state panel, including in the marriage cases opinion of 2008, which he authored, reversing a Court of Appeal decision to hold that defining marriage as between a man and a woman violated the constitutional right of all Californians to marry. Our collaboration was a special pleasure because, in spite of our focus on the rather rule-bound and concrete arena of law, Chief Justice George also showed great interest in the oral history process. He was taken with the idea that one could record a cohesive and orderly life story, but that the moment of recording was transitory. He seemed especially drawn to some language long used to describe oral histories, not original to me, that communicated that idea with these words. Because it is primary material, oral history is not intended to present the final, verified, or complete narrative of events. It is a spoken account offered by the interviewee in response to questioning, and as such, it is reflective, partisan, deeply involved, and irreplaceable. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to accept this award on his behalf and to keep company with such fine literary figures tonight. Congratulations to all.
It's really kind of fascinating. Our next book is Scrape the Willow Until It Sings, the words and work of basket maker Julia Parker. This is also an oral history of sorts. It's a multi-leveled book, beautiful, incredible photographs of Julia Parker, a master basket weaver, and an oral history in Julia's words and then the overarching contextual narrative of Deborah Valoma. So Julia Parker is a master basket weaver, still making her incredible pieces, and in this book we learn about Parker's life journey mostly in her own words. Textile historian Deborah Valoma provides many layers of context to help us understand the complex meanings and purposes of these baskets, which includes art, history, and spirituality. Gorgeous photos by Lee Fothery bring the baskets to practically tactile life. This is a wonderful, important book. The category is contribution to publishing, but Scrape the Willow Until It Sings, the works and work of basket maker Julia Parker, should really win an award for contribution to life. We are very pleased to give this award to Heyday Books. And here is Deborah Valoma.
Thank you, that was lovely. Scrape the Willow Until It Sings chronicles the words and work of Julia Parker, one of the preeminent Native American basket makers of California. Distinguished elder of the Coast Miwok and Kashaya Pomo, and longtime resident of the Yosemite Valley, Parker is a prolific artist, teacher, and storyteller. I first met Julia at the age of 11 when I watched her weave behind the Yosemite Museum, where she worked for many years and continues to work today. Julia and I met again 30 years later when I invited her to speak to my students at the California College of the Arts. As I watched her hands weave for a second time, I understood that she carried a great burden. Baskets that once contained acorns, pine nuts, and berries now carry something different: indigenous identity and cultural continuity. Julia has taught me that baskets are not simply objects, they are acts of resistance. For 2 decades, Julia and I have been in conversation. From the tangled mass of many hours of recorded conversation emerged a hybrid form, part art volume, part oral history, part personal reflection. And despite the linear imperatives of the book, I allowed Julia's looping storytelling drive the direction of my narrative and shape the structure of the book itself. The result is a volume woven with Julia's words into circular composition. When I first approached Heyday, Malcolm Margolin asked me to see the manuscript. I didn't have one. I'm not really a writer, I said. I'm a visual artist. I handed him a 200-page mock-up of images, captions, and a little bit of sketchy text. My goal, I told him, was to provide Julia with a platform to locate her work within contemporary aesthetic context, and to debunk the cultural stereotypes that still exist and define traditional art as obsolete. I have to admit that Malcolm laughed when he saw my non-manuscript manuscript. No one, I think, ever handed him such a thing. But he knew Julia Parker well. He knew that her mission to honor her elders by passing on indigenous knowledge was a story worth telling. I want to thank Malcolm and the amazing staff at Heyday for their faith in my uncommon approach and for their steadfast dedication to this project over the last 10 years. I also want to thank the Commonwealth Club for recognizing Heyday's publishing innovation and excellence. It's a great honor to be here to accept the award on their behalf. I also want to thank my mother and my partner who are in the audience today for their support, for my daughter who is my very best and very toughest critic, for Lee Fothery, who is an amazing photographer and literally brought Julia's work to life with his sensitive photographs. And most of all, I want to thank Julia Parker for trusting me with her treasured baskets and personal stories. As Julia always tells me, baskets are like stories. If you listen, they will tell you something. Thank you. That was very inelegant of me.
No, it wasn't. It gave us an opportunity to do something a little different. Right, thank you. Here, let's shake.
Well, I'm Stephen Boyd-Saum, editor of Santa Clara Magazine and a member of the nonfiction jury, along with Alden Mudge, Roy Eisenhart, and our chair, Mary Ellen Hannibal. Among the true stories that we were drawn to this year are some powerful tales of illusion, not least of them about the history and ideas that have defined a Caribbean nation which just might be, as writer Amy Valence observes, not lost in the backwaters, save for when disaster befalls it, when the eyes of the world turn to that place, but in fact might be defining a larger historical curve. Farewell, Fred Voodoo, a letter from Haiti, is built on the kind of reporting that takes years. Indeed, Valence's work in Haiti goes back nearly 3 decades. She's written here a love letter of sorts, tormented, crafted along the arc of history, but written big through personal stories, good, bad, and ugly. There are naive do-gooders and disaster relief junkies. There are doctors whose hands-on work beats the infernal corruption. There are Hollywood stars and heart of gold missionaries. But one of the nagging questions that returns again and again, what kind of a road can you build? What kind of a city can you reconstruct with good intentions alone? Fred Voodoo is a disparaging term for the man in the street in Haiti, useful slang for journalists. Amy Valence's book captures how journalists and others try to tell stories of Haiti. Here, in pitch-perfect prose, she breaks others' illusions and gives us something far more complicated and haunting. Congratulations to Amy Valence, the Silver Medal winner in nonfiction for Farewell, Fred Voodoo.
So, thank you. The next time someone looks at YouTube to see how to, receive an award at the California Book Awards, they'll see me with my iPad. I hope. Yeah. I just want to thank the Commonwealth Club and the California Book Award jury so much for this. I cannot tell you really how honored and grateful and actually, to be honest, really stunned I am to be here accepting this award for Farewell, Fred Voodoo, which is my second book about Haiti. Somehow, to be here receiving it seems counterintuitive. So I like to say it was 25 years ago that I began my long engagement with Haiti. It sounds better than almost 3 decades. And it made some sense because I already spoke French. I lived in a New York neighborhood where there were lots and lots of Haitian refugees. I had read Graham Greene's incredible novel, The Comedians, about the darkest days of the Duvalier dictatorship. And then one day, to shorten things up, I looked at the New York Times and I saw that the dictatorship was actually coming to an end. So I dropped everything and rushed down to Haiti to cover the story. It was the first time I'd ever been a foreign correspondent, and actually it was the last. I got down in time to see Duvalier leave. So I wrote my first book there about the fall of the dictatorship and the rise of democracy. I was deeply involved, and I lived there for 2 years running. Part of that book was dominated by my time with a bunch of street orphan boys. I followed them around, and they followed me around. I got stories from them. They got, bits of coins and little odd jobs from me. But after that book was published, my life moved on, though I was always in touch with my Haitian friends. Their country was and is my second homeland, declared by me, not them. Some of them died, some were tortured, some left the country, and the orphan boys grew up. About half of them died of AIDS, tuberculosis, accidents, shootings, and drug deals gone wrong. The story was difficult and sad and upsetting. I moved to the Middle East and wrote a novel. I moved here to California, luckily, so I could get this award. And I wrote a memoir about being in California during the recall vote. Although I remained connected to Haiti and I visited often, I grew less involved. In LA, I embarked on an ambitious new novel, which was half written when on a Tuesday afternoon in January of 2010, a huge earthquake flattened Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti. I did not want to go down and see all the death and horror in a place I loved so much. But a week later, I found myself back there and once again fully, profoundly sucked into the story.
I watched as outsiders tried to help. I was covering that story too. I watched Haitians watching the outsiders. I was led around again by my old friends, the street boys, who were now grown-up men. We went through the rubble and the earthquake camps. We ate sparse dinners in the camps and had beers in hotel bars together. I met the babies of these former boys. So Farewell Fred Voodoo is partly about that earthquake, partly about my long engagement in Haiti, but it's also about the world's engagement, the Red Cross and UNICEF, the UN, and Bill Clinton and Donna Karan and Oprah and Sean Penn, and about how the boys I knew grew up and were shaped and changed and deformed by the economics of poverty, and about how all the goodwill in the world, if not accompanied by understanding and knowledge, can't fix profound problems caused by an unfortunate series of events in world history, the foundational one being 2 centuries of slavery. I still dream of retiring to Haiti, and I thank my husband, who is here tonight, for allowing me to harbor this dream. It's a wonderful, vibrant, strange, dreamy country, powerfully beautiful as well as deeply wounded and vulnerable. It has taught me everything I know, which is still not that much, about human character in all its frailty and strength. Thank you.
For our radio audience, this is a reminder that this is the Commonwealth Club of California program, and tonight we're celebrating the 83rd Annual California Book Awards with the winning authors. You can catch up with us on Facebook and Twitter and hear Commonwealth Club programs on the radio and on our YouTube channel. And then there's the fate of the world, hanging in the balance so precariously in the atomic age, with rash judgment or a miscalculation or a faulty 46-cent computer chip, perhaps triggering an accidental nuclear explosion or a full-on exchange of missiles. The meaning of security, both national and a very false sense of that term, pulses through the pages of Eric Schlosser's Command and Control, Nuclear Weapons, the Damascus Accident, and the Illusion of Safety. 6 years in the making, this massive project traces decades of weapons development and policy. The encyclopedic recounting is hung on the spine of a story, one story in particular, an accident in a Titan II missile silo in Arkansas in 1980. The beginning of the tale was trivial enough. An airman conducting maintenance on the missile dropped a wrench socket. That ruptured the skin of the missile, causing oxidizer and fuel leaks. The countdown to disaster began, leading potentially to the detonation of the most powerful warhead the United States had ever built. Schlosser brings to bear the full force of his skills as an investigative journalist here. Those are well known to many through his book, Fast Food Nation, and other works. One of the frightening lessons offered here is that, again and again, it's actually not the policies and control systems that avert Armageddon. As those close to the core have observed, it's too often had to do with luck and, perhaps, divine intervention. Congratulations to Eric Schlosser, the gold medal winner in nonfiction for Command and Control.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the Commonwealth Club and particularly the jurors for selecting my book. There were thousands, if not tens of thousands, of nonfiction books published this year, many of them wonderful, and I'm honored that mine was chosen. I didn't really set out to write a book on nuclear weapons. I was spending time with the Air Force, and I was interested in the future of warfare in space. So I was spending time with the Air Force Space Command and the U.S. Space Command, organizations most of us have never heard of, but that do exist and are planning how to defend us in space. And it turned out that many of those officers had started their careers as missile launch officers in control of ICBMs. And they started telling me stories of the Cold War, about near misses with nuclear weapons. And I was amazed by these stories. but it was that one story about the accident at a Titan II missile silo that I just couldn't get out of my head. This was the most powerful warhead the United States ever built. This one nuclear warhead had 3 times the explosive force of all the bombs used by all the armies combined in World War II, including both atomic bombs. And it was involved in this serious accident in Damascus, Arkansas, that could have ignited and destroyed the whole state of Arkansas. And I was amazed that I'd never heard this story before. And the reason that I'd never heard it, and the reason most of us have never heard it, is that the United States government insisted that this accident posed no threat to the public and that there was no chance of this warhead detonating. I soon found that that was a lie. It could have detonated in this accident, and that there were hundreds of other accidents, literally, that could have led to our own weapons detonating on American soil with catastrophic effects. So I set out to tell the story, the effort to control our nuclear weapons, not as it's usually been told with high-level diplomacy and, secretaries of defense and secretaries of state, but the ordinary enlisted personnel who managed our arsenal day in, day out. And I think the importance of my book really has nothing to do with me. It has to do with this existential threat we still face from these weapons, largely forgotten, largely out of the public mind. And I think the power of my book has very little to do with me. To the degree the book is successful, I'm telling the stories of ordinary people who risked their lives, risked their careers, sometimes lost their lives in order to prevent nuclear catastrophes. I wish the book was just of antiquarian and historical interest. It's not. This is an extraordinary threat that we still face, and I thank the Commonwealth Club for bringing attention not just to my book, but to this issue of profound importance. Thank you.
Good, the type is big. I'm very happy about that. Yeah. So I'm Peter Fish. Good evening, everybody, and I'm here to present the First Fiction and Fiction Awards. This year, my fellow judges, Sarah Manika and Catherine Ma and I, were faced with the difficult but enormously gratifying dilemma of choosing 2 winning books out of a half-dozen worthy finalists. The finalists in the First Fiction category were Andrew Lamb's Birds of Paradise Lost and Anthony Marra's A Constellation of Vital Phenomena. Our winner, the California Book Awards medalist in First Fiction, is Anthony Marra for his Constellation of Vital Phenomena. Set mainly during the Chechen Wars of the 1990s and early 2000s, Constellation turns half-remembered headlines into a gripping and powerfully imagined work of literature. Anthony couldn't be here with us this evening as he's in New York, so accepting on his behalf is Tom Jenks. So congratulations to Anthony Marra, medalist in First Fiction.
Thank you, Peter. I'm the co-editor and founder of Narrative Magazine and have had a 5 or 6 year relationship with Tony, and I'm honored to be here and accept on his behalf. He would love to be here and would be here, except that months ago, before he knew about this award, he made the commitment to be at the New York Public Library tonight for the Young Lions Award ceremony, where he's one of 5 finalists. He's there right now, and I'm sort of momentarily hoping to hear something. And if I do, I'll let you know. But Tony is, first of all, a young writer. A mentor of mine about 40 years ago, Peter Taylor, Pulitzer Prize winner, who I think some of you might remember, once observed that you can never tell about young writers, how they're going to turn out. And mostly that's true. But in Tony's case, I think it's not true. When he first arrived at our threshold with an unpublished story that came in through the slush, he was immediately recognizable as special. And I did some work on it, sent it back to him, and he relates that I cut 15 pages out of it. I don't remember that. What I remember is the alchemy that he brought to the page. And you see this only in the works of really gifted, very special fiction writers. In other words, he would key off of whatever it was that you were suggesting or doing on the page, and he would come back with thoroughly unexpected magical things that had an easy persistence and a profound penetration and just expanded the dimensionality of the work so much. And when you see that, it's such a pleasure. It's an astonishment. And Tony just did that right away. Our friend from the Bank of the West was asking about how writers begin. We have a little feature in the magazine called Best Advice, and we sometimes ask writers to give us their best advice that they've ever been given. And Tony wrote a little short piece about his father, who's an attorney in D.C., and his father had on the corner of his desk a geode. And Tony related that one day he was there in his father's office, and there was the geode, and his father looked up at him and said, "If you want to be a geologist, be a geologist." And obviously Tony didn't want to be a geologist, but we're so glad that he did what he wanted to do. And I was talking to him earlier today, chatting, and I said, "I'm going to claim you for the Bay Area." And he laughed and he said, "Raiders, 49ers, A's, and Giants are all my teams." I don't know what he's going to do if it's a Bay Bridge series, but we'll see. Some writers seem to burst on the scene like a comet. It's been an animus mirabilis for Tony this year, but it's been a 5 or 6 year trajectory for him to do what he's done. And I think what I most want to say is that we will see him for a long time to come. There are going to be a lot more works from this writer, and he's going to be here as part of the Bay Area and part of our culture for a long time. And I'm so grateful and happy to accept this award on his behalf. Thank you.
Okay, our 4 fiction nominees ranged in setting from an unnamed Latin American nation to the wilds of Northern California to the South Seas. They are At Night We Walk in Circles by Daniel Alarcón, Cinnamon and Gunpowder by Eli Brown, We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler, and Goat Mountain by David Vann. Our winner, the gold medalist in fiction, is Karen Joy Fowler for We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves. This immensely readable novel, with its smart, quirky, and engaging narrator, introduces readers to one of American literature's most unforgettably dysfunctional multi-species families. And the question for us as judges was this: how can a book that is so funny be, in the end, so thoughtful and so deeply moving? For that is the feat that Fowler managed. Congratulations to Karen Joy Fowler, gold medal winner for fiction.
Thank you. I am so very honored and flattered and grateful to be standing in front of you. My thanks to the Commonwealth Club, to the Bank of the West, to the jurors who have given up what to me is one of the most precious things you can give up, reading entirely for pleasure for months. I stand before you with a slightly guilty conscience over all of the times that I have talked about moving from Bloomington, Indiana, when I was 11 years old, to California, and how hard that has been for me. I apologize for the number of times I have stood in front of audiences and said that I would not be a writer today if I had not been forcibly moved from the verdant paradise of Bloomington, Indiana, to the hellhole of Palo Alto, California, at age 11. I have lived in California ever since. I have made my peace with it. In my defense, I had been told how very, very beautiful California was. I arrived in the middle of a parched, deserty sort of summer. And the Golden Gate Bridge, as it turns out, is not golden by any stretch of the imagination. The book that I have written takes place partly in Bloomington, Indiana, where I grew up, and partly in Davis, California, where I spent many, many, many happy years. It was inspired largely by the work of my father, partly by the work of my father, and the idea to write it came from my daughter. We had gone back to Bloomington, Indiana to celebrate the Millennial New Year, and we had had an entirely Hoosier extravaganza. We went to a Pacers game, we went to a John Mellencamp concert. We danced until dawn at the Slippery Noodle Blues Club in Indianapolis. And then we went on down to Bloomington, where I began to talk to her about her grandfather, a man who died before she was born and who she therefore had never met. My father was a behavioral psychologist. He studied learning, and when we were in Indiana, he worked primarily with rats. He trained rats to run through mazes, and he studied how they learned the right moves to make. I think I spent many, many happy hours of my childhood in the rat lab at Bloomington, at IU in Bloomington, Indiana. I think there can be few people on the face of the planet who have the nostalgic hit off the smell of rat cages that I get. And I believe that I began to argue with my father when I was about 6 years old over the question of whether animals could think or not. My father, I don't know that he had an answer to that question. He really wanted me to be careful in the assumptions that I might make. And of course, anthropomorphism was the great sin in those days that a scientist might make, and he was cautioning me against that as well. In his defense, he was not impressed with the way people thought much either. So I was telling all of this to my daughter. I told her of an experiment which I sort of thought the whole world knew about because I had heard about it so often growing up, an experiment that took place in the 1930s in which a psychologist attempted to raise a chimpanzee simultaneously to raising his human infant child, a little boy, in order to compare and contrast what their capabilities would be. I told this story to my daughter. My daughter said, "You should write a book about that." And so that is what I did. Not only do I have this novel as a result, I have, at long last, an answer to the question every writer struggles with: where do you get your ideas? I can now simply say my daughter gives them to me. I did I looked at a lot of the research on animal cognition and on primates in particular when I was writing the book. And I would just like to leave you with a couple of things that seem important to me. I recently read France de Waal's nonfiction book, The Bonobo and the Atheist. And France de Waal is one of our premier primatologists. He works in Georgia. And there were two things that he said that strike me as important enough to share with you today. The first one is that in the sciences, it has long been understood that humans are simply on a continuum with the other animals, that it is only in the humanities and the arts in which human exceptionalism continues to be practiced and celebrated. The other thing that he said is that based on his years of research and observation, that empathy is a natural primate behavior, that it is part of our Darwinian heritage to be empathetic, and that we see this in all the great apes and all the monkeys as well. It is natural to us. This is the good news. The bad news is that our empathy only extends to those we consider like ourselves. That for anyone that we consider other, we have what Dewall calls actually an empathy deficit. We are not neutral. We actually have an antipathy, a desire to not extend our empathy that far. And this is why, obviously, whenever we go to war, the first thing that has to be done is to persuade us that the people we are fighting against are not like us. And this is also perhaps part of our primate heritage, that this is a fairly apparently easy thing to accomplish. So in my book, I think in all the books that were nominated in my category, I think in most of the books that are written, it seems to me that one of the great challenges, the great goals of literature is to try to expand our sense of who we can include in like us. That the goal of literature is to expand that as far as it can possibly go until we are all completely beside ourselves. Thank you.
How great are writers and writing, and we're so lucky. Our thanks to the publishers and authors who submitted their work to the 83rd Annual California Book Awards. We especially want to thank this year's winning authors who did such great work, and we are so delighted that most of them were able to come this evening to share their ideas, inspirations, and process to produce such impressive work. Thank you again to the Bank of the West, Mike Bracco and Paul Weibel and the entire team. We are very grateful for your sponsorship, and to Dr. Martha Cox and the late Bill Lane for their generous endowment. Thank you to my colleagues on the book jury. Just now you get to read for what you want to read at random and not for too long. And we get, there's a man here tonight who's already submitted an award for a book for next year's award. It's about Abraham Lincoln. I'm looking forward to reading it. So I'm Mary Ellen Hannibal, California Book Awards Jury Chair, and now this concludes the 83rd Annual California Book Awards ceremony, and this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California is adjourned.